this is the kind of reading where people only come into this temple once. Because neither the Bible nor the Bhagavad Gita gives you much margin on this one. Just alike, pleasure and pain, a piece of gold, a clod of earth, all the same. Don't expect anything from your family. Just give. I mean, it's awful, really. Even I, listening to it, think, please, no. There must be an alternative. I used to teach most of the beginning meditation classes. I've been part of this temple for a really long time. And at the beginning, when there were many fewer people who had experience to do that, I did the Meditation 1 classes and everything. And I'm a devotee. I mean, I talk very freely about Divine Mother. I talk about God. I talk about the Guru. It's all very, very natural to me, although it wasn't when I started. Let me just back up. Starting way back, 1970, I think, actually. The first time I went to where there was only one Ananda at that point, at Ananda village up in the hills. And I was in the the registration room, I think, and there was this other man there, turns out to be Benai, who was a very original member of Ananda. Benai was about probably 20, 25 at that point. I was 23, so, I mean, we were all the same people. But he was talking about Benai. At that point, Ananda itself, this one rural community, was so primitive. Primitive, let's just leave it. I mean, teepees, there were few actual houses. There were things made out of plastic. We realized that you could buy a number of 4x8 pieces of wood and nail them together, which would be called a packing crate, but it kept the rain out. So it was primitive. And we were struggling for money, and anything that we could do that would work, that would give us money, was a really good idea, as long as it was moral. I have to put a caveat there, because all our neighbors were growing marijuana, which was not legal at that point, so we didn't do that. We didn't do that. So Benai, who actually later became an astrologer and a gemologist and has gone into, he has had a whole business for years making real jewelry out of real stuff. But he figured out you could hollow out pieces of manzanita wood, fill it with rosin, and put dried flowers in it and make these very rustic medallions that he used for all sorts of things. So this was his whole business with zero expense for the materials. And in order to find a place to do it, there was an abandoned bread truck, probably said bread somehow on the outside, because we always called it the bread truck. And it was just there. Somebody had dumped it there. So he went inside and he created a whole little studio in there, and everything was going really fine, but we were not super organized, and somebody else thought that the bread truck was an eyesore, and I don't know what vehicle they had, but they managed to drag it somewhere and push it over a cliff. So I'm in the reception area, and I'm overhearing Benai talking to Satya, this other gentleman there, and Benai is talking, this is all about like a devotee. He's saying, well, I thought Mother really wanted me to start the jewelry business, and Mother gave me the truck to put it in, but then apparently Mother decided that she didn't want me to have the jewelry business, so she pushed the business over the cliff. And I'm new on the scene. I knew something about the spiritual life, but I was very intellectual about it. So I never talked about Mother. It was just out of nowhere in my consciousness. So I'm thinking, this guy is pretty old just to be doing what his mother wants him to do. It's a very American thought, of course, but that's what I thought, And then I thought, what kind of a mother would push his business over the edge of a cliff? And I'm convinced that Swamiji knows what he's talking about, but it's quite clear that no one else does. And I'm there. And then later, not much later, I found out he was talking about Divine Mother, which did not make it better. It's like, again, what kind of a mother would do that? Then I had some big issue, because I had lots of big issues. I had some big issue, and I managed to talk to Swami Kriyananda about it. And most of the time, he related to me in a way that made sense to me. But this time, after I laid out whatever enormous conundrum I had, which was just some twisted inner story, he said, "Just give it to Divine Mother," which was number 3, strike, as far as I was concerned, you know? And I thought, well, what the heck am I supposed to do with that? But I had my way of relating to Swami, which was true right to the end, which is, if I don't understand what he's saying, it's not likely that he's wrong. It's more likely that I haven't figured it out yet. At the same time, I was incapable of accepting something I didn't understand. So my compromise was to put it in a little brown package and put it over here. I had this big box in my mind where I put everything that I could not accept, but I dare not reject. And over the course of 40 years, I gradually opened every one of those boxes and thought, boy, this fits fine. Why haven't I been using it this whole time? Guess who changed? But I changed. So anyway, he tells me to give it to Divine Mother. Then 6 or 7, 8 years pass. Oh, must have been more than that. Anyway, I'm talking to someone. They present to me, guess what? Some big, complicated mental thing. And so lovingly, I lean over and say, "Just give it to Divine Mother," like that. And all of a sudden I thought, whoa, where did that come from? What happened in between? That's the whole story of the spiritual life. We think that the way you get on the path is you just walk into it and you read the book and you get the story and that's what you do. For some weird reason, and I found this out that I was not the only one, when you read that you're supposed to give up all your desires on the spiritual path, like why anybody thinks that's a good beginning, I don't know. But I thought it was a good beginning. I'm like, this is before I came to Ananda. This was when I was studying in another way with Ramakrishna's teachings. So I find my first a friend, and I'm going to help her, accept this great teaching that I've just discovered. So I start telling her, we start talking about how, life is often disappointing, isn't it? You want something and you work hard and then you finally get it, and she's with me, and then, it just doesn't turn out to be what you hoped it would be, and she seems so much with me. I think this is my number for my first convert, this is the beginning of my whole great, whatever it's going to be. And so we're talking about desires and how they disappoint you, and then I can still remember she looked at me so sincerely. Yeah, she says, that's true, they do disappoint you. That's why it's so important to keep on wanting new things. Well, scratch that one. That didn't work very well. Because, any common sense person says, give up everything you want. That's what God wants you to do. What kind of a God is that? That just sounds so terrible. So going back to where I was when I was talking about teaching beginning meditation classes, and by this time in my life, I've figured all this out in a way that works, at least for me. And we teach meditation as a path to God realization. Of course, it does a lot of other things, along the way. But it's for self-realization. There's a real intention. It's not just to become more aware of all your desires and get better ones. It's to really understand a whole different dimension. But people would sit in the class often and say, I'm an atheist, or an agnostic at best, but I'm an atheist. You're talking about God. I'm not interested in God. I learned to say, tell me about the God you don't believe in, Because the word God in the English language, which is the word that we use, it has no actual meaning when you think about it. You have to get some theology to tell you what it's supposed to be. So tell me about the God you don't believe in. And invariably, in this valley where people are very intelligent and think a great deal, and they would explain to me, some concept, and I would say, gee, I don't believe in that God either. Who would? It's just such a terrible idea that you just need to be miserable if you want to be my disciple. The more miserable you are, the less you have, the more brainless you become when you can't tell a lump of gold from a lump of clay. Like, why would you want to follow a path like that? Of course you don't want to. So let's just start over. Let's just assume everything means something different. You see, this is the great secret of Scripture. It's not rational in the way that we're used to doing things. It doesn't come from a sort of bottom-up, if this is true, then that's true, and we logic it out, and we build a little structure like this, and we try to get it up like this. Scripture comes from a totally different level of consciousness, where a God-realized master, one who has transcended all of this, just sees it. And this is what great artists do. This is what great musicians do. This is what great scientists do. I heard some little fragment of an interview on the radio once of somebody who'd done something to do with genes, not genes, but genetic structure. And he'd done some enormous project mapping the gene something. Forgive me, I'm so ignorant on that world, but you get the point. But the interview was, nobody believed you could do this. Well, he said, I always knew I could. And what he essentially said was, I saw it first, and then I went backwards, and I knew it had to be there because I knew where it was at the end. This is what Einstein said. Einstein saw it first, and then he went back to figure out what it would look like. When the masters write the Scripture, and we're talking from Krishna, we're talking from Christ today, Christ saw it. He saw what human consciousness is. He saw why we are born, and much more deeply and much more importantly, he could see what brought us suffering and what brought us happiness. And the fact that is different than we think it is, I mean, what kind of a God would just want to take away the tiny little bit of comfort we have in this world? You know, the little bit of affection or security or whatever it might be. How could God possibly say to you, oh, you think it's bad? Let's make it worse. And then we're supposed to say, yes, Father, yes, Mother, of course I will. Not if we have a brain in our head. We won't do that at all. We have to learn from experience. And this is the great power of true teaching, which is what both Jesus and Krishna taught us, that they are responding to the way that we're made. But this world, and I have no idea why, I couldn't possibly answer why, but God made it tricky. He made it not be what it is. That's why the verse from the Gita is so interesting. It's just the opposite of what you would think. But pain and pleasure, they're really different. But gold and clay, they're really different. But from the higher perspective, no, they're not. They're just what we impose. But then there's the whole other part of this whole story is what he's talking about. The little ego, which is not really who we are, but it's who we think we are. That gets so confusing. You know, that's why we love these stories about the baby switched at birth, and the king actually grows up as an impoverished peasant, and then the impoverished peasant realizes that he's the king, and he brings his dear loving mother up, and then everybody's really happy. And it's a great story because it was not what it seemed. But in the fairy tales, now that they're in the palace, they're really happy. Now that they don't have to work with clay anymore and they just get to work with gold, now that'll make them happy. Except that didn't take into account, let's see, war, hurricanes, betrayal, disease, plague. I mean, like the difficulty, the tremendous difficulty of human life is that we are so stunningly vulnerable. Just stunningly vulnerable. What do we do about that? Recently, the prayer went out because a student who grew up in this school, was always in our school. She got caught up in some violent story and she was actually killed. I mean, she died. You know, a woman in her early 20s, somebody that we knew as a child, who stood on the stage and was in all our plays and everything.
I just get the first message is pray for her. She died. I said, how? Well, she was shot. Some crazy person got, like, you finally got it. You've raised your daughter. She's doing great. She's all on her own. And then tomorrow she's dead. And most of the time it doesn't happen. So we play the odds. Most of the time it doesn't happen. So I'm going to bank on this one. This incarnation, I'm going to get it just right. I've worked out all the pieces, and this incarnation, it's going to be just right. And then it's fine, and then it isn't. How many times do we have to do that? How many times do we have to do that? That's called reincarnation. How many times do we have to do it? That we just think this tiny adjustment. I asked Swami the question. I asked him a different question, but he answered me. I think it was accurate. My concern was, at the age I am now, I am not as stupid as I was at other ages, back there when 40 seemed really old to me. 40 now still seems just barely out of short pants, just like you're just getting yourself together. But 40 now seems like a long time ago. But I'm concerned that when I'm 15 and when I'm 20 and when I'm 22 again, I'll be a lot like I was when I was. And I was sort of wanted to ask Swami, how much of it can I take with me? How much of it is really mine and how much of it is just as old as I am? But he didn't answer me. But he did say, here's what causes reincarnation: longing and regret. I mean, you have this whole huge philosophy and the metaphysics and the chakras and the vrittis and the karma and all of this stuff. What is the fundamental issue? You long for it or you regret it. I want to have it, and it can be positive. It was so much fun being married to you. It was so much fun living in the mountains. It was so beautiful raising our babies, or whatever it might be. I want to do it again. I want to do it again. I want to do it again. Or else I never got to do it. And I really, 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 really want to do it. So you try one more time. You make yourself a little prettier. You make yourself a man instead of a woman. Whatever it might be. You just try it one more time because you long for it. Or you regret. Oh, if only. If only when I had a choice between Henry and Philip, and I chose Henry, who was such a dog, and Philip was such a prince. Next time I'll choose Philip. If I could just have Philip, or whatever it might be. If I had only been an artist and not a banker, or a banker instead of an artist. If I'd only, regret. If I'd only gotten there in time. If I had only been home to get the message. If only I hadn't lost my temper. You can see what it is, but you see the origin of it is, I would be safer and I would be happier if. And so we run that for millions of lifetimes because we only learn from experience. Master made the horrifying statement that anything that you're not drawn to do now, including, let's say being a murderer or a thief or anything, the only reason you're not drawn to do it is because you tried it and it didn't work. Because we don't learn from being told. But once you know it, you just know it. Isn't that true? Can't you tell in yourself the difference between really knowing it and then trying to affirm that you know it? This is how the three great delusions, wine, sexuality, and money, you just think you're free until all of a sudden you're not. There it is. And then you do something awful and then you regret it. I used to have these weird dreams. Thank God they were just dreams. But the dream, it was a little period of time, and I would dream that in some way I'd done something that was so inappropriate that I had destroyed my whole life. And I usually in the dream didn't know what I'd done. It was just the aftermath. It was the incredible, anguishing aftermath. And the dream would just be knowing that everything that I had strived for, I had now destroyed by my own actions. Oh my God, talk about being happy to wake up. But you could see how a cycle like that would build itself into the subconscious. But then when it comes to you this time, you don't touch it. You don't touch it at all because you know. But you see, how far does that go? Because you look behind you and you see that you were really drawn to do these things because you thought they would make you happy, and now you really know they don't, but you see all these other people who are still doing it. And then we stand here, and the saints and masters look at us, and they think, all right, if this is what you really think you need to do, go ahead, but it's not going to work. And what's the end point of it? And so we start on the spiritual path because we have had enough of trying to make ourselves secure by taking this world, which is just so ephemeral and so completely out of our control, and try to fix it in such a way that this time it won't wiggle out. This time it will stay where I put it. And then finally, we've had enough. We've just had enough. And we start asking really serious questions. Where does my security come from? Where does happiness come from? What is the purpose of this life? Is the purpose of this life ease and pleasure? When people talk about good karma, it means easy, pleasurable karma, doesn't it? We talk about bad karma, it means painful, challenging. But if ease and pleasure just causes us to get fat, lazy, and stupid, and then die, and then sleep through the astral world, and then come back and do it again, is that like the apex of happiness? I mean, really, sometimes you have to think, when we meet challenging karma, this is something that's worked for me at least, when I meet really challenging karma and God is really asking me to change, I ask myself, do I think that I have achieved the greatest level of happiness that I could ever have right now? And if the answer is no, then why am I afraid? Why am I afraid that I'm going to learn something I don't know? And so Krishna gets our attention by being nicer and saying sweeter things than this. And Jesus gets our attention by being nicer and saying sweeter things than this. So when he says, every place that you think your happiness and your security comes from, guess what? You're wrong. But not because I want to punish you, but because you have no idea how glorious, how beautiful, how powerful, how unshakably strong you actually are. So listen to me. I'm going to tell you something. It's completely different than you think. And then yoga says, give it a try. It's like, if you're an atheist, come in, be an atheist. Tell me what you don't believe in, and we'll just not worry about that. But give it a try. And then pay attention. See what the results are. Just like one step at a time. And you don't see yourself changing. Back there when I said to that woman, just give it to Divine Mother, I realized, oh my gosh, I know what that means. And I know it's a good idea. How did that happen? How did I get here? Because I didn't get here from walking in and then just blindly putting that dress on and just wearing it. It didn't fit me at all. But I didn't throw it away either. Because how do I know? And it's all represented by, you see it in front of you. Swami Kriyananda walked into the room, 1969, just before Thanksgiving, over at the Stanford campus. He walked into the room. He hadn't said a word. I'd never seen him before in my life. He had been recommended to me by someone I trusted. And I could just tell, and this was what my intuition that I didn't know was there said, he has what I want. I didn't even know what it was. He has it, I can tell, he has it. Because later I understood there's a consciousness he brought in. And it was joy, and it was courage and it was free. And I'd been looking for it my whole life. I mean, I was at the giant age of 22, but at 22, I've been looking through it for many lifetimes. Oh, that's what I want. And then you think, well, I know a certain amount, but if he says something, and he said so many things that were just so out of the box for me. But if he is that person, and that's what he is seeing, then I at least have to stop and consider that it might be true. And then it's kind of like this. You're kind of like this. And then all of a sudden you realize, how did I get here? But when you're here, you look back and you think, I would never do that again. And so Jesus tells us, give up your life and you'll find it. And you have to say, well, maybe. Why don't we at least try? God bless you, my friends.